Creating engaging educational games that work well for teachers and students in real-life classrooms is a complex task. Classroom integration is just one half of the battle, however. Measuring what students are learning and how is just as critical. Jim G. over at ASU will now tell us more about how, if done correctly, games can serve as powerful assessment tools. We're here at Arizona State University. I'm talking with Jim G. today about games, learning, and assessment. Thanks for being with us today.
It's great to be here.
Let's start off with, what do you think assessment is? How would you define assessment?
Well, I think we first have to distinguish between assessment and testing, right? Because the people confuse those and you get into a lot of controversy. So assessment is a judgment about what progress you're making. And in fact, if you think about it, assessment is kind of indigenous to life, just to lead a life. You do stuff in the world and you have a goal. But in order to accomplish that goal, after you've done something, you've got to appreciate what happens in a certain way. You've got to say, what happened when I did that, is it working towards the goal or not? Was the result good or not? Do I like it? Do I appreciate it? That's an assessment. The world's assessing you, and you pay close attention to that. Then you change your action if you think the result was not good, and you keep doing that till you accomplish your goal or you change your goal. So assessment is part of core action for human beings. It's got a natural home. It's what Donald Schoen called the appreciative function. So for me, the assessment, when it gets into institutions like schools, you are formalizing a very natural part of action. And when we talk about formative assessment or evaluative assessment, what you're really talking about is both of them are ways to resource the learner. Formative assessment is assessment that is coming right back to the learner, like this appreciative function, saying, am I making progress? Is this working? And evaluative assessment, if it's ethical, is telling some other stakeholder, teacher or principal or parent, how can I resource this learner? Is this trajectory working or not? So that's what assessment is to me. Too often we define assessment in purely psychometric terms, and we miss the fact that it's a natural part of learning if you view learning as progress through time.
So you described some different visions in there in terms of what assessment can be and should be. What do you think the state of assessment is right now? And
well, I think that for me, the state of assessment is when you look at formalized assessments like tests or the ways we carry out assessments in school, they're done because they're effective, right? They're efficient. They're efficient. And if you think about it, in a time where we could not really collect copious information about you and we could not watch your development over long periods of time, doing some sort of assessment that was standardizable and then comparable to a bunch of people and efficient is probably, it's an industrial system and it worked. But today, we can collect copious information through all sorts of digital ways of getting information, but also all sorts of ways of collecting it through activity. So that means to me that we are almost morally bound to assess you in a different way. We're morally bound to assess you on multiple variables, not one. We're morally bound to show you, when we assess those multiple variables, what it means and what you could do about it, rather than give you untransparent information, right, that just sorts you. I mean, an A or a C or an 88 doesn't mean anything because it's not actionable. We also are morally obligated when we can collect lots of information, not only on you, but all sorts of other people who've done the same thing as you. We become morally bound to assess growth, development, trajectories towards progress. For me to say, this curve of your growth is pretty normal. It's normal at this point that you get somewhat worse because you're reorganizing your knowledge, but you're going to get better. Or to say to you, you're doing well, but there's even a more innovative way to solve these problems, to grow in a different way. So, almost to do a therapeutic act about development, about growth, about trajectories towards mastery. Now, all of that, even 10 years ago would have been inefficient, impossible, but we're coming onto a world where we can do that. Furthermore, in some cases, when we're interacting with digital media or we're interacting in systems, that sort of information and how it is then mined and given back to you for this growth-based assessment on multiple variables can be done intricately to the learning system. Right? We can get, if you think in a good game, it's very hard to distinguish learning and assessment, right? Because essentially the game is always assessing you and then telling you that didn't work. Here's some information to make it better. So learning and assessment are tightly married. And to the extent that games like Halo or Civilization or others give you assessment, it's often multiple variables. And it can often be done by comparing you to thousands or millions of other players. So for example, you get a heat map that shows where most people have trouble on a map, where there are crunch points, and then you can see where you had the crunch points, and you can then even talk about what strategies different people have used. So assessment becomes entirely different, and I think not just on the grounds we can do it, but I think it's on moral grounds. It's no longer moral to me to give you a drop out of the sky, non-transparent score on one variable or one small set of them when I can give you this much richer information.
Can you give an example of where you think this is being used effectively now?
Well, you know, it's been used effectively for some years in video games. So if you look at a place like real-time strategy games like Rise of Nations, after you finish this is part of the fun of the games, after you finish each play session, which you might be playing against 3, 4, 5 other people, you'll get 20, 25 different graphs that graph on different variables how each of these players did across time, who was ahead here, who was on 30 variables, right? And what do you use those for? I mean, they truly are an assessment. They're not an A, B, C, D. They're 24 graphs that show you across time when you were winning and when you were losing across multiple variables. And you are using those to get to a metacognitive level. You're saying, okay, I played, now I'm going to understand that last play session at a theoretical level so I can plan strategy, right? So this is assessment that is not just formative in that it's helping me, but it's also forcing me to theorize the game, right? Which is a very deep form of learning. Now, if we can do that in a video game, we can do that in schools. And there's been a lot of work on data mining, you know, taking the exhaust off of digital systems. Where we have been weaker is how do we collect copious information when the person's not just doing a click stream, right? How do we begin to collect information across time in systems of collaborative learning and stuff? And then not only that, share that information across institutions. Be a wonderful thing to know, here's what Johnny and Janie did in school, here's what they did at the library, here's what they did in the community center, the after-school program, and have the adults on the same page. And that is coming, people are doing that. But it does run up against the testing industry, right? It runs up against an industry that says, I want accountability, I want it on a narrow set of grounds that can be done efficiently because I want a mass product. You know, it's like saying, I want to sell you a standardized mass car in the age where we could customize all the cars, but we'll just customize them for certain consumers, right? So a kid who's playing Dreambox is going to get back a lot of information about, you know, the progress they're making in math, about growth. But a kid in some urban school may just get, you're at this percentile, and what do we make of that?
Get it once at the end of the year. Yep.